Listen, we all know how well 23 books for 2023 worked out for me, but we are living, we're laughing, we're loving, and we are especially learning from our past mistakes. I thought it would be such a good idea if I only did books on that list that I owned physically on my TBR. However, then I became a Kindle girly, specifically because my poor carpal tunnel wrist could not handle holding all of those books, and I kept wondering why I was in pain all of the time, and maybe it's because I was spending 8 hours a day like this, or on my phone like this, or on my computer like this. Well, all of those things more than 8 hours a day, probably like 16. So I got my Kindle, started going hands-free with my reading. So a lot of the books on this list are not actually on my physically owned TBR. We're gonna talk about some upcoming anticipated releases that I'm excited to read. And I'm being a little bit more realistic. I think that list was like a dream. It was like, who do I want to aspire to be in 2023? Not being a little bit more realistic about where my reading is actually heading and what my life is looking like and what I could accomplish. So my only goal for this year, for 2024, is that I read more of these books than I read for my list for last year. And I think that given the books that I'm putting on this list, that feels so accomplishable. So for whenever I'm watching this a year from now and reacting to it, shout out to future Lexa. I hope I didn't do you as dirty as past Lexa did me. With that being said, we have 24 books to cover and not a lot of time because I don't want to be here all day, and nor do you, I don't think. So let's go ahead and get into it, but don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button if you enjoy. Let's first go over the books that I want to read that are currently on my TBR. That does not mean I have to own them. A lot of these I do. I either have them physically or I have them on my Kindle, but not all of them. And that's because it's just so much easier to get books from Libby in the library on my Kindle than it is to like go to the library and physically get the books and then read them, you know? So I just feel like I feel good about straying away from my already owned TBR and just into books that I already want to read that are already released, mainly the ones that I own, with a few others that I don't sprinkled in there. Then we'll go over the books that I want to read that have not come out yet, but I am anticipating for 2024. And starting off strong with a book that I feel very confident about, that is All's Well by Mona Awad. I am a Mona Awad girly. I loved Bunny. I even loved Rouge almost just as much as I loved Bunny. And that is a hot take. But I heard that a lot of people who were talking about Rouge that liked Rouge said if you liked All's Well, you would probably like Rouge, and that maybe if you liked Bunny, it wasn't gonna be really your thing. And since I did like Bunny, it still was my thing. I was like, okay, this feels like I am absolutely sold on reading All's Well by Mona Awad. So I asked for the physical copy for Christmas, even though chances are I'll probably read this on my Kindle. I just am so confident that I'm gonna love it that I already preemptively wanted a physical copy so that if I decide to, and it is pretty floppy, I can go through and annotate as I read. I believe this is Shakespeare inspired. There's chronic illness representation. It is weird, but I've heard not as weird as Bunny. Also, probably a good thing for me to mention, if you don't already know, if you're new here, I don't like to read synopsis of books very often. So a lot of these books I'm not gonna know a ton about, but I'm just going to tell you about why I wanna read them, / what I've heard about them, / the vibes I know going forward. And that is risky, because if we remember from last year, I did confidently tell the internet that How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix was about someone's parents dying from COVID-19, and it absolutely was not. So take everything that I say in terms of what I think these books are about with a grain of salt. Sorry about that one. Next up is Iron Widow. I want to read this for 2 reasons. Number one, most importantly, is that when I, during one of my videos, mentioned, hey, all I am desperately wanting is for the standard typical love triangle to go from the girl having to feel like she chooses one of the guys to like, what if we all just got together? And I've heard that this book is poly. And oh, I'm so excited! So excited. But number 2, which I'm also so excited about, is that the sequel to this is finally being released this year. I believe in April or June. So my plan is that I'm probably gonna read both of those back to back. Maybe try to get my partner on board with reading it. Maybe try to get both of them on board with reading it, so that hopefully we can fangirl together. Oh, another important caveat that I want to mention is I did my best, and I'm pretty sure that I stuck to it, making sure that everything on this list I didn't put in my 23 books I wanted to read in 2023. If there is some overlap, I'm so sorry, but I'm pretty sure there's not. Number 3 is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. Mira Grant is a pseudonym for Shauna Maguire. Shauna Maguire is one of my favorite authors. Into the Drowning Deep, I believe, is about killer mermaids or sirens or something like that. And it is horror, fantasy-ish, but it is kind of long, and I will admit that is the main reason I haven't read it yet. But another one of the main reasons that I hadn't read it before was that I didn't have a physical copy of it, but now I own it on my Kindle. So I feel like that automatically makes it more likely that I'm gonna read it this year, especially when I get in these moods where I'm like, I need more Shauna Maguire writing in my life. And the fact that I haven't read Into the Drowning Deep, and the fact that I haven't read a lot more of her horror books, because Mira Grant is the name that she writes under for a lot of her horror books, feed is also one of those. We're getting so sidetracked. Anyway, I really want to read this. Number 4 is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. I actually started this. I was like doing a try a chapter tag and then I ended up picking something else to read, but I was loving this and I literally only didn't read that because I was worried I wasn't in the headspace. And I will say that current Lexa sitting in January with seasonal depression, probably really not in the headspace for this, but I know that I'm going to be. And there were so many times that I almost read this last year that I know, I feel pretty confident about this one that within the next year, I'm gonna wanna fit it in. It is a fiction book, but I've heard it reads kind of like nonfiction because it is about this man writing letters to his mother who can't read English. So it's just kind of him detailing like everything about his life and the things that they've been through. And it's very honest because he's saying these things that he wants to say to her, but that he knows that in some way, like she's not gonna hear him say, like she's not gonna be able to consume what he's saying, so he can be really vulnerable and honest about it. So excited. I feel like that one's gonna make me cry. The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nevo. I have this on my Kindle. This is a novella fantasy series. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm now realizing that I don't know literally anything else about it. Other than the fact that I know a new book, I believe recently just came out in this series. I heard Books Like Whoa talking about how much she loved it. I know that Kayla from Books and Lala loves this. And that's all I really need to know. I could look up the synopsis to try to pretend like I know more, but I honestly don't need to know any more than that. In novellas, I feel like I definitely don't need to know more because I just feel like the synopsis gives so much away and I don't want to do that. 2024, the year where I'm reading less synopsis, which didn't even know that was possible. Number 6 has been on my TBR for so long and I finally do want to prioritize that, and that's The Firekeeper's Daughter. This I thought was fantasy, it's not. It is a YA mystery thriller book by Angeline Booley. Things I know about this. We're following our main character, she's Indigenous, but she also does go to school with all of the local non-Indigenous people as well. So she is kind of balancing her life between these two worlds and realities that she lives in. And then one day, I think she witnesses a murder and kind of gets thrust into an FBI investigation and is trying to figure out what has happened, helping solve this. There's a boy, there's a hockey team. These are all of the things I know, and honestly, say no more. Also the cover, stunning. I talked so long this last time, I'm desperately trying not to do that this time. These videos just always feel so unhinged because I already feel like I am so bad at describing the plots of books that I've read or am currently reading, nonetheless ones I have not. Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. I will make sure to know everyone, like the proper pronunciation of everyone's names whenever I read and review these books. This I have actually started before and I now have the physical copy, don't know where it is, need to find that. I would actually really like the Kindle copy now that I think about it, but I also have the audiobook. And this is a nonfiction book all about sexuality and breaking down a lot of the preconceived ideas as a society that we've put into people's minds about sex and orgasms and what it is like to be a sexual human being. And I was absolutely loving it. I learned so much. And as someone who my only access to sex education was in high school when the two local pastors from the megachurch, one of the many megachurches, because I live in the Bible if you didn't know. I don't live in the Bible. I live in the Bible Belt. Kind of feels like living in the Bible sometimes though, if we're gonna be honest here. I live in the Bible Belt if you didn't know. So my public school, I didn't go to a private school, brought in 2 local pastors from the megachurch. They didn't like to be called the sex ed guys. They were very clear that they wanted to be called the abstinence guys because that's what they taught. Abstinence. Yeah, you didn't teach sex education. I mean, if anything, at least they were honest because I learned nothing. There was some sort of a chair analogy that basically was like, don't make out for more than 10 seconds because then you'll have sex and you'll get pregnant and you'll die. And then some pictures that were meant to like horrify and shock kids of STIs and not to educate us on STIs and like how to have safe sex and how to minimize your risk for STIs. No. It was just to scare us because then the one thing that they did talk about with STIs was like the only way to guarantee that you don't get an STI is to not have sex, so just don't have sex. Okay, cool, thanks for that. So anyway, as an adult, I have been relearning a lot of the bullshit that I internalized. But I knew I wanted to include some nonfiction since I only read one nonfiction book last year. And I feel like prioritizing my top favorite, most anticipated nonfiction is gonna be the way to go this year. And I've also made it my life goal to let every single straight white male know about the orgasm gap. And I feel like the knowledge that this book is gonna give me is gonna really help out with that. Next is an unexpected addition. Had you asked me a few months ago, this I don't think at all would have made this like top 24, but it absolutely had to this time. And that's The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. I read Vampires of El Norte and surprisingly really loved it. And surprisingly really loved it because of the romance that was in it. I didn't know it was really romance heavy. I thought it was more horror with like a little bit of a romance subplot, but I have like never so quickly fallen in love with two love interests the way that I did like as an adult in my reading in this era of my life, the way I did with those two characters. So I'm so excited to read another book by Isabel Cañas, and I've heard really good things about this one. Mexican Gothic meets Rebecca. Fantastic. Love that. I'm in. Another book that absolutely has to make the list, Out There Screaming, which is a Black horror anthology collection that was put together by Jordan Peele. I am not a movie girly. I love Jordan Peele's movies. I've watched them so many times. There are so many authors in here that I'm really excited to read their short stories from. And I know that this is also going to be a Literally Dead book club pick this year. I don't know if it's for February. It might be. Either way, I am going to read this, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to wait until the Literally Dead book club, but I am going to try because I feel like what is a better way to read an anthology than with Kayla and discussing it with Kayla and everyone else when she loves anthologies so much. This is gonna be wonderful. And the first short story in there is by N.K. Jemisin, and she literally can do no wrong, so come on. The next book is actually a recent addition to my physically owned TBR, and that is All About Love by Bell Hooks. I heard Reads with Rachel talking a lot about Bell Hooks. There's another book from Bell Hooks that I really want to read as well. I don't know a lot about this other than the fact that it is nonfiction. I've heard Bell Hooks is just an absolutely incredible person and author, and I believe that this explores just like what love means and how to love, and how as a collective society we can learn to love and support each other, and love in all of its forms. And I love love, so I am in. The next book is so interesting because the other book in the series was actually on my worst books of the year list, and that is A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. I've talked about how I want to read this because it's the prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree, and the entire time I was reading The Priory of the Orange Tree, even though I wasn't loving it, I kept thinking this is the story she wanted to tell, which was that we were getting a lot of information about what had happened, I think it was like 1,000 years before in this world, and that story sounded so interesting, and I wanted to see that. I was hoping for like dual, like I wish it would have been dual timeline, but I guess if she knew that she was gonna write this, then that makes sense. And this is the story that I feel like I would have been more interested in, was the prequel to what was happening in Priory of the Orange Tree. So I am gonna give this a shot. I did actually already start this, and then I was trying to see if I could just listen to it on audiobook because the ebook hadn't come into the library yet. That is not gonna happen for me. I'm way too bad with names, and there are so many names and places. I need to be able to look while I am also listening. But now the ebook has come in, so we'll see if I'm gonna restart it or if I'm gonna push it off for a little while. We'll see. But it is on this list. So the next one, I knew I wanted to include a book by Brandon Sanderson, and I included Trust of the MLC last year, and I thought about including it on this list this year too since I didn't get to it. But like we all know that like that's one of the top books that I want to read that is a standalone by Brandon Sanderson. So instead, to try to stick to my rule of not repeating any books, I'm going to include Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, which is another standalone, but it's one of his earlier works, but it is part of the Cosmere. I believe that that is the one that has to do with a magic system that is based off of colors, and that's really all I know and all I really need to know because it's Brandon Sanderson and it's a standalone, and I'm hoping to make my way more through the Cosmere this year. Last year I put the entire Way of Kings on this list. Friends, no. Okay, we're being more realistic. I would be happy if I got to one, but I just don't know if that's gonna happen. I don't know if that's in the 24 journey for me based off of just how many things I have planned for this year. The next one is kind of shocking. If you know me, you know that I'm not a romance girly despite how much I want to be, but because of that, I want to do a video or a series or something where I read a lot of the romance books that I feel like are on the top of the ones that I think are going to work for me for very specific reasons. And Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez is one of those. And I would say one of the top ones that I think if I am going to like romance, I could find it in this book. So I don't actually own this book on my Kindle or physically, but even though I have an entire shelf of romance books that I have not read yet, haven't touched since I bought them, I feel like this is possibly my in, mainly because every single booktuber, even ones who don't like romance books, ones that have very similar taste to me, that read this book end up really loving it. So I just feel like it's objectively a well-written book. I think that it helps increase my chances that I'm really gonna love it as a romance book. Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, I have on my Kindle. This has been on my TBR for the last year. I think I bought it last year. There was like a deal for $2.99 on Kindle. It's cozy fantasy. We're following a main character who has half a soul and therefore just like it doesn't interact with a lot of people in society the way that they expect her to and like doesn't respond the way they expect her to, and she's just trying to learn how to like navigate that. And I love some cozy fantasy to break up some of the darker and heavier books that I'm reading, or like the longer series that I'm reading. And I loved Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, and I think that this is kind of comparable, so I'm excited for that one. Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. One of my partners has been telling me all about this and how they think that I'm absolutely going to love it, and I think that he's right. And it was so cute because last time I went to Barnes & Noble, my partner bought one for me, like a copy of it. So I am absolutely going to read that in 2024, no doubt. Probably the entire series, but at least the first one. Because I'm sorry, is there anything cuter than a direct recommendation for a book? There's actually quite a few books on this list that I'm reading because they were direct recommendations for books from people in my life. And I just, how could I not? That is the cutest, sweetest, most instant way into my heart and soul. Number 16 is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Marina Machado. I was so shocked I didn't put this on my list last year. I read In the Dream House. It's one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time. It's a memoir told with like different, I believe they're different tropes in media, maybe specifically horror tropes, but I don't think so. I think it's just tropes in books and media. And it's like in the dream house as a choose your own adventure story. And each little section is describing part of her experiencing this abusive relationship and her finding her partner that she's with now. And I've heard nothing but really good things about Her Body and Other Parties, which I believe is a short story collection, and I don't think it's nonfiction. I think it's speculative. And I just feel like In the Dream House was literally the perfect representation of such creativity in a nonfiction book that then when given fiction and speculative elements, I just feel like this is gonna be an instant favorite 5-star. And last on the list before we get into anticipated releases, which I thought about including anticipated releases, but I think it's already been out for like a month now, so I wouldn't count that, is Cytonic / Defiant by Brandon Sanderson. Technically, I haven't read Cytonic, and this you have to read before you read the last book that just came out, which was Defiant, and this is the Skyward series. I've read 2 of the novellas, now I need to read this, then I need to read the last novella, then I can read Defiant. But because I originally thought that this was the last book in the series, and then I figured out that it wasn't, so I'd started reading it and then I stopped. But now that Defiant is out, I feel okay continuing on in the series. I loved Skyward. It was my first introduction to Brandon Sanderson, and it was what made me instantly like fall in love with his writing. I was so shocked by how much I loved that, especially since it was young adult, especially since it was sci-fi. I laughed, I cried. I think it's the best in the series that I've read so far, but I have heard Defiant wraps it up really well, which makes sense to me because if there's one thing in my experience that Brandon Sanderson does really well, it's endings and making everything come together and worth it. So moving on, we have 7, I believe, yes, 7 anticipated releases on this list. Technically a couple of these literally just came out, but because they weren't out in 2023 when I started making this list, I'm counting them as anticipated releases because they did release in 2024. Okay, glad we established that. The first one is Tidal Creatures by Shauna Maguire. This one has not come out yet, but it is the next book in the same series that Middle Game and Seasonal Fierce is a part of. I loved Middle Game. It was one of my favorite books of the year in 2022, and I have been hesitant to read Seasonal Fierce. I didn't know if she was going to carry on in this series. Now that she is announced the next book in the series, I am more excited to read Seasonal Fears. That way I can absolutely read Tidal Creatures. I just love Shauna Maguire so much. So absolutely that's on my list, and I feel like absolutely that I am going to read it, and it's going to be the motivation I needed to read this, which was on my 23 and 23 list, and I didn't read it because I was scared that I wasn't gonna like it. The next one did literally just come out today, and I'm so excited. Mislaid in Parts Unknown by Shauna Maguire. Again, another Shauna Maguire. This is the 9th book in the Wayward Children series. I love that series. I did a video where I read all of them in anticipation for the 8th book that came out, and including the 8th book last year within 24 hours. That was so much fun. I've been thinking about doing that again, but I would need to bump it up to 48 hours, but I just don't know if I'm gonna have time, and I really just wanna read this. So we'll see. I might just read a few of my favorites in anticipation, but this is just like one of my favorite series of all time. I'm so glad that we get a new book every year. It's following children who find doors to different magical worlds. This one is it rotates between telling a story of an individual child in their world and telling a story at the school and the children kind of working together. This is one of the ones that is at the school. Oh, and we're following Aunt from the last book. Ah! Okay, I can't wait. Oh, that just made me so much more excited, as if I could be. I was like dying to open this book today when Amazon delivered it. The next book that I'm also dying to get started that also came out today, that is also part of one of my favorite series of all time, that is The Atlas Complex by Olivia Blake. I loved the Atlas 6, loved the Atlas Paradox even more, and I am so excited for the 3rd and final book in this trilogy. Listen, nothing happens in the books. All of the characters are unlikable and pretentious, but the writing is absolutely incredible, and somehow I end up falling in love with all of the characters, and there are just so many that I want to root for, and I cannot wait to see where she goes with this. And I did already buy it on my Kindle and on audiobook, and here's my thought process, is that I want to read it now as soon as possible. So I did that, and then I figure when they start coming out, hopefully with some special editions, or when the price of the hardcover goes down a little bit, I'll buy the hardcover if I end up loving it, which I'm so hopeful, fingers crossed, that I do. Then I can put it up with all of the rest of the series and all the pretty books that I have, because I have multiple copies of both the Atlas 6 and the Atlas Paradox. Next, I actually am now thinking this might have come out at the end of 2023, but I did include it in anticipated releases. It's fine. Okay, you forgive me, right? We're all just gonna overlook it. It doesn't matter because it's Heartstopper, volume number 5. This has been so healing and so amazing, and I have loved getting to experience Nick and Charlie. This is like my exception to the fact that graphic novels and manga don't always usually work for me. I'm obsessed. I've reread those books so many times. I will probably reread the first 4 in order to complete it. And the graphic novels, so you just like fly through them. I'm so excited to see where Nick and Charlie end up. This just is so healing for my bisexual heart who wishes that I had books readily available like this whenever I was a teenager. Maybe I would have realized I was queer a lot earlier than I did. Then we have Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands? Yes, that comes out at the end of this month. That is the second book to the next in the series to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I loved that so much more than I thought I was going to. The relationship between the 2 main love interests that we're following is just incredible. Their banter, excellent. Obsessed, love them. It's all about the characters for me in this, which is shocking for me to say, because there is like light fantasy, like she studies fairies and she is making this encyclopedia of fairies, and we're learning all about this world from her as an expert. I just had such a fun time. And I cannot wait for the second book, and I'm hoping I can get the audiobook, because the audiobook version, at least the first book, really incredible. This one, I will give myself some grace and say that I don't think it comes out until December. So that does make it a little tricky to put on a list of 24 books I'm gonna read in 2024 when it doesn't give me a lot of time. But I'm now blanking on the name. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. Can't believe that I didn't remember that. I did get that 5 stars though. I loved it. It was another example of a fantasy book that has like a romance heavy plot that has like light fantasy but was very cozy. That really worked for me, and I think that a lot of that had to do with the writing and the vibes, and I'm really excited for this next book, which is A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. I don't think it's a direct sequel. I think it's just similar vibes by the same author. Oh, this comes out in April. I don't know why I wrote December. Okay, we're fine. Okay, yes, I don't think that this is a direct sequel. I think that this is something that you can read on its own, and I vibed with Sangu Mandana's first book so much that I'm just so excited for the second one. And this last one, we are ending off on an interesting note, especially since the existence of this book isn't a thing. I don't think it has a title. I don't think it has a release date. I think it's just that we know it's coming, and you would think I would not be one of the girls who would be reading it, but alas. It's untitled. It just exists as Empyrean number 3 with a release date of who knows, but I feel like I heard somewhere someone talk about how Rebecca was saying she was gonna take a year before it was published. And anyway, that is the 3rd book in the Fourth Wing series. Read Fourth Wing, thought it was fine. I get it if you hate it, I get it if you loved it. Iron Wing, that book was awful. Okay, I'm so sorry if you loved it, but I have to question, did you love it or did you just love Fourth Wing and you carried that love through the shitstorm pile of mess that was Iron Flame? Something to think about, something to think about. Doesn't matter, but I will be carrying on in the series, because if there's one thing that I have realized about this series is that it is so much fun for me to rant about, and there are so many specific things that I hate that I just have such a fun time talking about it with people. So I will probably continue on, even though I don't have a lot of hope, but I do, I hope, but like I don't have a lot of hope, you know? Rebecca hasn't given me a reason to have a lot of hope in her and what she's gonna do carrying on in this series and how she's gonna make this into 5 books. But anyway, that's quite the way for me to end this video. Let me know what books you're excited about to read in 2024. If any of these books on the list you are also planning on reading this year, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Bye!